Hello, how are you kids? We have a new class today and we are going to learn about passive voice. So, what is passive voice? The first important thing. It's like a different way of expressing, a different way of saying things. And it is related to formal English, okay? So, usually you are going to read or to speak using passive voice in, for example, newspapers headlines, or when you listen to the news on television, or maybe when you are reading some important papers. Okay, so in these cases we use the passive voice. One important aspect of it is that it focuses on what happened, what was the action, and not who did the action. That is like in the second place of importance. Let's see an example to see if we understand. For example, I can say, some thieves stole a bank. This is a common sentence. Algunos ladrones robaron un banco. In this case, you see that this is the verb. It is in simple past. Okay? In this case, this is the subject of the sentence. I mean, who did the action? And in this case, we have the object of the verb. I mean, what happened? What object can we relate to the verb stole? So that is the first important part to take into account when we are speaking about passive voice. I always have to understand the subject, the verb, and the object. So, as I told you before, in the use of passive voice, it is not a sentence in passive voice. It is a normal sentence as the one that you are usually used to. So, in the use of passive voice, the object is the most important thing and the action that happened to that object. So, the object is always the first part of a sentence in passive voice. So, I start with a bank. Then I continue. What happened to the bank? The bank was stolen. Okay? The bank was stolen. Who stole the bank? And in this case, I ended with the subject. Some thief. By some thieves. So, this sentence is a sentence in passive voice. A bank was stolen by some thieves. So, let's analyze this. First, we have the object. Yes, the same object that we have in the common sentence, we have it here, starting the passive voice. Then we have a verb in passive. And finally, introduced by this particle, by, we have the subject, or in this case we call it agent. That is the person who did the action. How do I translate this sentence? Un banco fue robado por algunos ladrones. So, what is more important? The most important part is this. The bank was stolen. And who did the action? It's obvious that thieves made the action. So maybe it is not so important to write the rest of the sentence. So I could have said a bank was stolen. Because this is the important part that I want to transmit. who stole the bank? It's obvious that there were thieves, but the important part is this, that it was stolen. Okay, so that is important to know, and the most important thing to understand. So let's repeat. This is the sentence in passive voice. I am going to write PV for passive voice. And the first one is the sentence in active voice, so I'm going to write AV, standing for active voice. All right? So, in the sentence in passive voice, the first part is the object of the verb. Then comes the verb in passive, and this is the most important and the most difficult, and the thing that probably you are going to have problems with. So, because the verb in the active voice is in the past simple, the verb in the passive voice has to be in past simple too. Now we are going to see how do we form the verb in passive, okay? But wait just a minute for that. And finally, we always use by before the person or the people who did the action. And this part over here, the agent, it is optional. What does it mean? We can write it or not, depending if it is important or if it is obvious or if it is unknown. Because maybe I don't know who did the action, but I only know what happened. And, for example, I could say, my book was broken. So it means that somebody broke my book, but I don't know who. But the important fact is that it is broken now, okay? So let's focus on this part. How do we form a verb in passive? As you can see here, it has two components. First component, it is always verb be. And this is the verb that is going to change tenses depending on the tense the verb in the active voice is. For example, here the verb is in the past, that is why I use be in the past. In a couple of minutes, we're going to see some other examples with different verb tenses. And the second component is always the main verb, in this case still, yes? So the main verb, but in past participle. Always in past participle for all the sentences. This part never changes, okay? Past participle. Remember that past participle form of a verb is third column if it is irregular, or ed if it is a regular verb, okay? So this is always the same. The only thing that changes is the verb that you want to use, but always in past participle. Remember that. And this one, verb to be, is going to be changing depending on the verb of the main sentence. So now let's focus on that part and let's study that part. Perfect. So here we have some examples of another very simple sentence. Susan writes a letter. Okay, so there is nothing simpler and easier to understand than this sentence. Susan writes a letter. So, Susan is the subject, write is the verb, a letter is the object, and what is the tense, the verb tense here? It is in present simple. So, how do I make the passive voice? I start with the object. In this case, a letter. So, a letter. Now I have to make the verb in passive voice. And as this verb here is in present simple, remember that the verb to be here needs to be in the present simple too. So a letter is. Now the main verb in past participle. Written. And now if I want, I write the agent, I mean who did the action. It is introduced with by, okay? A letter is written by Susan. Una carta es escrita por Susana. In this second one, the verb is in simple past. So what I have to change is the verb tense in the verb to be of my passive voice. So a letter. The past of the verb to be is was. Was. It is always in past participle. Written by Susan. Now I have the verb in future simple. So I will have to write the verb to be in future simple. And I start. A letter will be, this is the future simple of verb to be, will be, now the main verb in past participle, written by Susan. Okay, una carta será escrita por Susana. And finally, in this other example, the main verb is in present perfect, has written, ha escrito. So I have to write verb to be in present perfect. A letter has been, this is a present perfect of verb to be, has been written by Susan. Una carta ha sido escrita por Susana. So I understand, I know it is a lot of things to process. It's not easy. So watch this video once or twice or as many times as you need. Try to understand the topic the best you can, and all the doubts and questions that you have, we are going to revise them in class. Okay, so I hope to see you next class because it's going to be very interesting. Bye bye, thank you.